If you're doing HTTP, it's great. And if you're trying to do you are okay. In the mountains. Basically, in your own world. So ridiculous experience. So James got like I'm gonna go away on our ice. Super nice bike guys.
I'd met you before, thanks to you.
Every time. Yeah. I didn't know
Does he have any options?
Yeah, it's immersed in the water.
Last night. Yeah, well, so you got the bar, so watch the game, right? So if you watch the game, all the three different TVs to watch. So if you look at each of the three pictures, but with you have all of a sudden, you've got the guys on the other side of the start yelling about 2 or 3 seconds. Yeah. So here's something
It's not working. I just need to use the proper. All right, that's wrong. that's not afraid to call you out. Just looking at all this, it's just not even you're trying to write for
It's stuck in a boot loop. So I'm trying to get it out of it. Because I can move my own, right? That's what I've heard. I don't know what no command means. That doesn't seem I don't know. Here we go. I don't like where this is going though. There's no whoops. I only wanted to try room at home.
I worked with him for 2 weeks.
Yeah, that might not be what I want. Hopefully, that's all. Yeah. Well, fingers crossed is right.
That was very much so. I heard it.
One probably needs batteries.
What's that?
One I think needs batteries in it. It's the only one that works as far as we can tell for a microphone.
That's how I feel.
Cool. Appreciate it. Is it one main battery?
Yeah. We're just like that.
Yeah, that'd probably be a good idea.
Number one problem. Yeah. For some reason, the other one.
Does it matter just turning it on? You have to activate something here. So just
Mine's pretty good. It's not turning on.
oh no, I'm just not doing it.
Sorry.
Yeah, Valerie. It's either busted or Valerie's busted.
It might have been the other way around. It might have been the other way around. Maybe the other one.
Oh,
Okay, if I go first?
Don't start your thing.
And actually,
Hopefully my phone is now.
Get it out.
Huh?
Get it out.
I should have, I guess. Usually Android's been great for me. I do like pineapple on my pizza too. I'm one of those psychos. I know not everybody's into that.
I actually got a Hawaiian pizza while we were in Hawaii.
So not too loud?
It was so good.
Oh yeah,
So
I
good.
love pineapple.
It made me faint.
Alright, let me take this off.
What?
Hey everybody, attention please. Welcome. We kind of have a weird mic situation going on here, so bear with me. Hopefully you can hear me all right. But welcome to React Meetup. Really appreciate it. Got a couple of great talks tonight, but just wanted to get started with a few things, a few agenda items. First off, thank you to our sponsors, Turing, obviously, for having us here. That's been great. This is our second time having a meetup here, and we were so impressed with the first, we decided to come back. So thanks to them. And also Crown Peak and Granicus for sponsoring the meetup as usual. So big thanks to them. And a couple other things. Logistics as far as bathrooms go, maybe you noticed, but if you just take a right outside of this door and straight ahead, there's a couple like individual bathrooms. They're just co-op bathrooms. And then I think there's a women's restroom on the side and a men's restroom all the way around the other side. So plenty of places to go. Just keep an eye out for it. So anyway, now that that's out of the way, obviously food and drink here, help yourself, looks like you guys have. Just wanted to give a quick, I guess, time period for anybody who is currently hiring. So does anyone have any job announcements they want to shout out or announce hiring? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
My name is Mike. I work for a company called TechStuff. We're a Boulder-based startup
jQuery and JavaScript. So hope to see me after the meetup.
Can you repeat the name of that company?
Yeah, it's called Text Us.
Text Us. Text Us, right?
Yep.
Awesome.
My name is Mark. A company called Race Monitor. We build lifetime scoring apps for racing, auto racing, go-kart racing, even lawnmower racing. We've got over 900,000 users, and we're looking to hire full-time senior software engineer with React Native focus, as well as a ReactJS developer on contract and contract React Native developer.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. Race Monitor. Here. And yeah, Paul.
Hey, my name is Paul. I work with an experiential design studio called Untitled, and we're looking for a contract ReactJS developer that has some interest in WebGL and data viz. Sounds like there's something in the fence.
Don't mind that.
But anyways, yeah, come and find me if you're interested.
Thanks, Paul. Yep.
My name is Chris with Wygo. It's a fairly startup. We're looking for a React Native developer, someone that's looking for a combination of sweat equity and some kind of monetary payment as well. But working on something very exciting. I'm on the business end. This is Griffin. He's another one of our developers. But if you want to get into something that's pretty exciting and just come talk to me.
Cool. Chris and Griffin, Wygo.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Fernando. I'm with RY Code. We're looking for as many as we could find, kind of great JavaScript developers, mostly React, Redux, and Stack. Just come talk, we're building a marketing and sales automation system.
Great. ROI code. Awesome. Anybody else? Yeah.
Hey, I'm Brian. I work for Interlex, and we're an environmental health, safety, quality software company. We have a headquarters in Toronto. We also have a satellite office here in Denver. We're hiring pretty much everyone, and we're looking more towards UI front-end engineers. If you're familiar with React, that'd be cool too. So come talk to me. After cool. If you're cool. Yeah, you guys are all Intellects, like intellectuals.
Intellect. Yeah, that's the company.
Intellects.
Intellects. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Cool. Anybody else? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, yeah. Feel free to talk to them, whether on the break or after the meetup, and get in touch with them there. So, but with that, we will get things started here. We have a couple great talks here tonight. First off, Hilary Denton is going to be giving us a talk on React Fiber, and then after her, Valerie Kraucunas is going to be giving us a talk on UI Kit. So please do stay tuned there, but let's get things started and give a round of applause for Hilary.
You guys can hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. So put this in my pocket. Try to keep my hair from getting in the mic. Cool. So React Fiber. Here it helps. So I'm Hilary Denton, like he just said. I graduated from Trinity about 3 years ago, and now I work as a front-end software engineer for a healthcare startup called Move here in Denver. So what the hell is Fiber? So React Fiber is a ground-up rewrite of React's reconciliation algorithm that is going to be shipped in React 16. So what's the reconciler again? Because I had to remind myself. So in order to answer that question, let's back out of it and remind ourselves, especially for people who might be newer here, what React itself actually does. So React is declarative UI. With React, instead of having to tell browsers exactly how to get from the current state of your app to the next state, you can describe what the states of your app look like, and React takes care of any updates or changes that need to be made to get to the next state of your UI. And it does that in two parts. The first part is reconciliation. So reconciliation is kind of the meat and potatoes of React itself, and it figures out the difference or the diff between the current version of your app on the right and the next version of your app on the left, and then it figures out how to efficiently update the UI to match the next version of your app. And the actual update of the UI is in the second step, which is rendering, and that's where you get the differentiation between React DOM and React Native and React, a million different things. Cool. So now that we've caught up on React and what React is and what React does, so why would we want to write the reconciler? So Facebook decided to rewrite the reconciler, and in order to answer the question of why they would do that, let's take a look at React Stack. So React Stack is what Facebook is retroactively calling the existing implementation of the reconciler that's used in 15 and lower. And so going over how that works a little bit, my phone is out of date, so I'm going to be looking at my computer. So the way that this reconciler works is that it takes the elements that you defined, either components that you've defined as the coder, or HTML elements, and then it creates an internal instance internal to React, and then it creates a DOM node, and that does that piece by piece. First the component, then the instance, then the DOM node, and it does that by recursively calling now component or update to component until it gets to the bottom of your component tree. So what that ends up looking like if you pulled up a timeline of your app rendering in the browser, it's kind of like this. And so you can see it goes deeper and deeper and deeper into the stack until it's done. And all the while, this process is totally blocking the browser's main thread from doing any other work that it needs to do, like drawing pending updates or to the document, or accepting input events, or scrolling a whole slew of things. CSS animations, can't do any of those things while your React app is rendering or updating. So enter Fiber. So Fiber's goal is to be able to break up the reconciliation of the tree into chunks, and then allow the browser to have access to the main thread in between those chunks of work. So this is kind of the future of what your timeline will look like with the browser. And I took the last two drawings from when Clark's code cartoons, because they're really cool. So that's what Fiber will end up looking like. So at the points where the line is going down, React is doing more computational heavy work that it needs to do on diffing the tree. And when the line comes up, if the work hasn't been done, then it's paused, or if it's done, then it's done. But then at the top of the line, the browser is allowed to do whatever it needs to do, whether that's all of the things that it listed before. So you might call this whole process the virtual stack frame. So React gave us the virtual DOM. Now it's giving us the virtual stack frame. So it basically allows React to keep the stack frames in memory and execute them however and whenever it wants. So let's take a look into how Fiber does all this. So this is basically a Fiber. It's has a one-to-one relationship with React's internal version of the instance. And so, I mean, it's just an object, and it keeps track of some additional information about the instance, including where it is in relation to other instances of Fibers. You can see that in the child, in the siblings, and the return. The return is basically kind of a parent of this specific Fiber. And then that was all of that relationship stuff was taken care of by the call stack before. You would just, like, the instance you were on knew the render method that it needed to call, which would basically return the children, and then it would kind of do the same thing to the children. So it wouldn't even know about its own parent. But then we have the output that is going to return the value of the Fiber once all the work is completed. And then the output will correspond to an actual DOM node in the case of the browser, or the whatever in the React or native. Whatever the alternate thing is that it's rendering. So then finally we have this, or not finally, but importantly we have this alternate, it's kind of third from the top. And So that is the actual piece that allows React to keep track of its work and therefore be able to pause it and execute it or continue to execute it however it needs to. So let's talk more about the alternate. So the current fiber, the fiber that is related to an instance, has an alternate, and that's called the work in progress tree. So when the browser gives React some time to build up this work in progress tree, it's basically building this alternate on this instance, and at any given time, this process of building up the work in progress tree can be interrupted and essentially paused if the browser needs the control to be relinquished to it. Okay, so phase 2 of reconciliation, that was basically, we covered phase 1 of reconciliation, that building up the work in progress tree alternate of the current fiber. So then that all is interruptible, and the browser can interrupt it if it needs to. And then the second part is the commit phase. And this is the point where any of the changes that we've figured out need to be made to the UI are flushed to the screen. And this part can be interrupted, because otherwise you would end up with inconsistent UI. And so Fiber also calls the lifecycle hooks and also deals with the new error boundaries that are coming with React 16 in this phase. Okay, so let's look at an example. You might have seen this before, if I can find my mouse. Someone? There we go. I think it's over here. It's fine. There we go. Okay, so this is an example that some folks that are working on React, I think his name was Sebastian, I think, created this exact example. So we toggle this thing off. This is basically a representation of what React does now. So it's kind of hard to see on the screen, but this is basically a series of triangles inside triangles inside triangles. And then when it can't make any more triangles, it has a dot. And inside that dot, it has a number that's incrementing from 1 to 10, and then back to 1, and then 10, etc. Like repeating that every second. And then it's also increasing and decreasing the size of the biggest triangle. So yeah, this way works exactly the same as React Stack. It's written with React Fiber, but it works exactly the same as React Stack. And so you can kind of see it's pretty janky. And if we turn it on, so this is using prioritization, which we'll talk about in just a second. But this is kind of the promise of React Fiber. There's basically a backwards compatibility mode. That's kind of how React's going to ship with React 16. But there's going to be a bunch of other stuff that ships after that that's going to end us up with something more like this, where we basically said that the expanding and contracting of the triangle is high priority, and the changing of the numbers inside of the circles is a low priority. I'm sure you can't really see it much on screen, but the numbers before were changing like pretty consistently. Okay, 10, 1, 2, 3, etc. And then if you turn it on, the increasing of the numbers gets like way slower, because we basically said that that's not as important. What we really want to have happen, highest priority, is the expansion and contraction of the triangle, so that we can get that smoother user interface and user experience. So, so let's talk a little about the priority. So this is basically the future of React Fiber at this point, because like I said, React 16 is going to ship with basically backwards compatibility mode, where it's still using the new Fiber like code, but it's basically functioning as a synchronous priority, which will function exactly like the stack technology. It will just basically do all of the code that it needs to do until it's done, and then it will go back to the main thread. It doesn't know anything about how much time is left between the next frame or anything like that. And then you have this other second priority below that, which is basically relates to request animation frame. So this thing needs to be done within the next, for animation frame, within the next tick, or the frame. And then we've got 3 different ones that use request idle callback, and that's a newer thing. And so let's talk a little bit about request idle callback. So that's kind of what, when we're looking at that graph where it went up and down and up and down and up and down, where React relinquished control over to the browser, that's what this was using, is request idle callback. So request idle callback is a function that the browser provides that allows you to pass a callback to it, and then when the browser knows it's going to have some extra time, it will execute that callback, and then it will give the code a certain amount of time for that callback to finish before the browser needs to take care of its own stuff, like CSS animations, scrolling, all those things. So yeah, again, that's how the example that we had with the triangles was prioritizing the number changes. Okay, so I kind of sped through this, talked really fast, but I will give lots of time for questions after. So just to wrap up the core concepts, the stack reconciler doesn't work very well, which is the current implementation. It doesn't work very well because it blocks the browser's main thread from doing any other work. And so Fiber is attempting to fix this by allowing the reconciliation process to be interrupted by the browser through creating these Fiber objects that keep track of what work has been completed in the work in progress tree, and then later in an uninterruptible phase, committing or flushing that tree to the UI. And Fiber will ship in backwards compatibility mode first, so it will work just like the stack reconciler. And they're working out the kinks of the time slicing, which is the really cool part of Fiber. And you can track that issue here, and I'll link these slides to the meetup so you can actually click that link. But they're tracking the async stuff here. So, and then I also link some more resources that you'll be able to click on in the meetup. So, questions? I just threw a ton of information really quickly, but I will try to answer any questions that anybody has. Yeah?
That was like the best summary of Fiber I've ever heard.
Oh.
Where would you recommend if someone was starting, like not the deep dive?
I have the next slide actually.
Nice.
There's a couple of sources. So most of this I got kind of from Lynn Clark, and then her code cartoon. She did a code cartoon talk, I think, at ReactJS 2017. And then blog post, what is Fiber, and just basically intaking any kind of information I could find. Another source which I could find the link to was, I think it was Kent Dodds, Dan Abramov, and Andrew Clark, and Lynn Clark, and then Brian something, I can't remember his name. But they did a single hangout where it just asked questions about how Fiber works to basically Dan Abramov and Andrew Clark, who are both working on the Fiber reconciler. And so I got a lot of things from there too. I looked at the source code some too, kind of got lost in there. But yeah, I'm glad that it was a good summary of what Fiber does with this. Anyway, yeah.
Do you, you work with React on the daily basis, right? So what part of React Fiber kind of excites you for your daily work?
So the priorities are kind of what's going to be really cool. It's not coming out right away, but we have to know that all of this stuff allows for them to get to the point where they're basically releasing this new thing to a bunch of people who use all these React components, and so they want to make sure that it doesn't break anything too much before they start adding new stuff on top of it. But the priorities, I think, are going to be really cool. And one thing I didn't really touch on with the priorities is that, and this is the main question I had, was how are those going to get set?
Right.
And in that video chat with Dan Abramov and Andrew Clark, they basically said they're not exactly sure yet, so they're kind of working out the kinks, but they do know they don't think they want it to be an explicit API where you have to set all of the different priorities. So they're thinking they would kind of guess. So maybe an input would have the high task priority, but an async set state or something like that would have a low priority. So we'll see how it ends up happening, but I think that that's the most exciting part for me, because it will basically make everybody's apps way faster, or not necessarily faster, like not more performant, but the code won't actually be faster, but it will trick basically the browser into being able to render better. Yeah.
Do you need to have a pretty involved, complicated app to start seeing noticeable payoffs, or is it noticeable with pretty simple apps as well?
It's kind of hard to tell how noticeable, because like 16 isn't going to ship with these prioritizing things. So even in this that example that I showed, they're calling like this unstable something function that is exactly how they said they weren't going to call the API. So even like you could test it out, and I'm sure that you would probably see some things like if you had like a search or something like that, where you have to type in someone's name, it would probably be vastly faster. Yeah, so I would assume you're going to see something once the priorities come out or they roll out, but they're not expecting to see anything just from Fiber itself, the implementation of Fiber itself. Yeah.
You mentioned that 16 was going to be backwards compatible. Is it going to be backwards compatible moving forward past that?
I think that's unclear to anybody at this point. I don't think they really know. The React team generally is really good about not making breaking changes. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why they really wanted to focus on the backwards compatibility with Fiber, is because they wanted to make sure that there was no breaking changes. And with React 16, there won't be anything that explicitly breaks your app, but with this app error boundaries thing, like if errors were getting swallowed somehow, they'll basically not be swallowed anymore. So, yeah, it's pretty good. Yeah.
So with the fibers, there's like you have a separate reconciliation on your application. Can you do like a partial commit? Like you say like, okay, if this part updates, go render it before I do the rest of it.
I think they're gonna really try to stay away from doing things like that, because then you can get inconsistencies. And other than having like an explicit API where you defined, hey, like this can happen asynchronously, I think it would be hard for React, like the code itself, to be able to tell which parts are allowed to be inconsistent and which parts aren't. Yeah.
So a follow-up on it, again, because that's what I would like to have. So the question is, like, right now, most of our React apps are one root node that we render on. Would this support like having multiple ones on a page without a big penalty, or did they talk about that at all?
I don't know the answer to that question. I can try and look into it and get back to it. Anybody else? Yep.
So in your research, did you find anyone talking about web workers or like maybe some multi-threading?
And how it would relate to Fiber?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in that chat with Dan Avramov and Kent Dodds and all those cool people, they mentioned web workers, and that Sebastian, I don't know his last name, I can't pronounce it, but he had looked into web workers and it didn't work out for some reason. So that's something that they might come back to, but I would assume that part of the reason they're kind of wary about it is because of like data integrity. Because once you get into multiple threads, you start to have to be concerned about like what data has been written where, and those kinds of things. So, something that might happen in the future, and would be, I think, easier with Fiber probably too.
Regarding backwards compatibility, is there anything that we can do like today on our apps to prepare ourselves for Fiber?
Yes. So the one thing that like I'm trying to be cognizant of in my own React app is, so set state, you can pass it an object or you can pass it a function. And since a lot of these things are going to be happening asynchronously, basically how set state works with an object is it puts it kind of into a queue. And so the last thing that happened is the last thing that is written. But if you pass it a function, it almost works exactly like a reducer. And that there might be some inconsistencies with the set state if you use an object because of the asynchronous nature of Fiber. So I would try to like convert all of your set states to use functions instead of objects.
Would that be just as simple as writing a function that returns
Yep.
an object?
Yep. And there's like documentation on it too. I could link an article to that too. But there's like a specific article I'm thinking of that's like, hey, you should use functions for stuff too. Anybody else? Cool. Well, that's it.
Cool. Well, we'll take a quick 5-10 minute break if anybody wants to get the restroom or snacks, some remaining slices of pizza here. Help yourself. No, it's just, yeah, it's just.
No, I do Slack. One of them is Slack. The other one the last one is with Coca-Cola. That one's not that one's kind of boring. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. I like that one. But it's a what's the fun one? Huh? What's the fun one? Well, yeah, it's hard.
Where else are you going to get to?
Yeah, so
And we're on our third category of honeymoon plants. And we're on the third plant inside the third category.
basically we were wanting to go to Iceland. We didn't get our shit together. Yeah. We get and we were going to go to
How much would we go?
yeah.
And there's another one coming in.
Yeah, yeah. So, like, I can't say when ran up with some guys basically we were going to see we were towering like, Steve, we're not
I started to come up with imagine during hurricane season, basically, I just
I was going to introduce myself. So we'll talk later. Thanks for working on this.
Yeah, no, glad to have it.
Oh, no, you shouldn't have to coworker. God, you know how it smells. I'm testing. Like in your company name here, or
Yeah, this is a like a project management tool that sits on top of GitHub. Yeah, it's pretty cool. As far as I know, yeah. And I think they've got pretty big growth. You know, they've been around for a while and they've been doing their thing. And making money by doing it.
so how did you get involved in
So this is mine and mine over there. We used to work together. Valerie or now.
Oh, Valerie?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sam. So Sam, he and Sam also worked together in Kraucunas, which is where Will met after Valerie. And then now he's right now I'm at CA Rally. No, I'm here. I'm not here. No, he is in town. Yeah, they made out. He made out.
I got to know him.
Trust me, it continues.
Ryan was
Very good.
I would say Ryan was like continues to like inspiring others to think about submissions. Yeah, the business crowd. Yeah, I thought he did a great job. Yeah, it was like 1% and engineers were really experience and 1% of the time.
Yeah, I think your place called that, where it's resources for teachers and difficulties with art, and they put unusual objects together and make things that teachers
This is a story that's cool. Yeah, the one that I did, whenever we did orientation, we went through this actually put together a care package that have like emergency situations for children, and they can't work, right? So like, if your child is critically ill, it's like a serious accident, you're gonna go to the hospital, you're not gonna go to the hospital. Right, so like his family's hard to get he was going hard against his eyes, unable to so this is very actually so I got to go to my room. It's good to like know who you're getting with.
I worked with nonprofits for a long time, and it's really good. And they do good work, but honestly, I kind of like this stuff more. Like people that create new projects. So I can find people that get just excited. Like the one
What do you all do?
So it's a really experience around here. Kind of monitors behavioral design. So they have a component of science around scientific behavior and taking products to make them better, I guess. But they work with all kinds of and they made their money data out of little portable wizards that are easy to choose. They were like commodities. And then the data itself is being essentially the whole universe. And the ones that are producing the data that will then be used to kind of moderate gambling.
Right, I got it. Yeah, you don't want to. I mean, everybody knows casinos don't actually make it random. Like, you may get lucky, but it's calculated.
They have the ability to kind of how we extend the playlist. So then anyway, then he's like, I'm told that they need to do meaningful drugs.
Yeah.
And
So he made a lot of money, and then he's like, all right, now I can.
Now I'm going to make some other things. So I got involved in digital healthcare. So that came back to me. And we have this project to redesign a platform for health tourism and how the couples going through it get information more accurately and more less studies. Oh, yeah. So we worked on that. And so I did some education
Yeah, people do like
I haven't.
It's typically like a stick. That's how you can look at your paying to yeah, I'd be interested.
Cool. Well, I will now give the stage to Valerie, and she will be presenting to us on React UI Kit. So please give her a round of applause.
All right, that, I can't hardly hear myself, so good, awesome. All right, so this evening I want to talk about React UI kits. There's several of them out there. Basically, I just pulled a list of, there were 10 on the list. Originally, I was going to do 5. We've ended up with 4 this evening of actually implementing them into a like stupid simple app. But I just wanted to essentially go through the pain of integrating a React UI library into a project, because a lot of times, you know, when a company is saying like, hey, let's just brainstorm, let's greenfield this project idea that so and so had, and you don't, obviously you're not going to be wanting to build your own UI like library. That's not a realistic goal. But at the same time, you don't want it to look like junk, because then you'll never get to go ahead to go with the project. So I kind of wanted to pull that. I wanted to basically go through what is it to just pull these in and like see, can I really just build something like fast, or am I going to be like dying in Webpack configs and whatnot? So tonight I'll just first real quick, apparently again, talk about why to use a UI kit or library. I'll tell you real quick like the things, like the rubric, if you will, that I'll be comparing them all against. And then basically I'll just go through these 4 kits. So Material UI, Semantic UI, Ant Design, and React Toolbox. So why use them? Essentially they're a fast prototyping option. You can use them for clients who just need a starting point. You can use them for your personal projects. You can use them for greenfielding, like within your work. They come with a decent amount of out-of-the-box functionality, which is really, really helpful, as opposed to being like, okay, I'm building an input. Do you know how many props are passed to your average input? Yeah, so, and then many of them also come with pretty robust styling. They're customizable, they're themable. A lot of times to do that, it is a little bit more work, but if you can like just get this, you know, get this form thrown together and on a page, like that'll make your supervisor or whomever a lot happier. It'll make you a lot happier, because who doesn't like, I mean, most of us are full stack or front end devs. The beautiful part about front end work is that you see something. You do something and you see it happening on the page. So then they range from being lightweight, minimal type things to being something, I say bloated, but my bloated might be someone else's like, this is amazing, there's so many options. It just depends on your point of view. I picked the image because it's kind of like you get to just get these things, you get to get these components just like running, essentially, kind of like cutting bread and toasting at the same time. So why maybe not to use React, or not, why not to use UI kits in general? Most of them are open source software and come with the open source pain points. So maybe it isn't a realistic thing to use long term professionally, because they may change something, they may kill it, they may stop supporting it, and that's obviously a big liability for a company. If suddenly your whole app isn't compiling because they just pull it off of NPM. Like that has happened, and a lot of times companies will end up bringing the whole code base like internal, and then maybe doing like little tweaks that they need over time, like adding another field onto an input, so there'll be like notes as opposed to just errors under the input or something like that. Your UX designer might wonder why am I here if you're just going to have all of these pre-styled components that you're going to use, and you're not going to listen to me or use any of the designs that I've just handed to you. Again, like these things are really great for prototyping, or if you have a UX designer who is just like, yeah, let's just use this library, it'll be great, and then it's good. But ultimately, like then you're like, well, what are you doing there? Anyway, a lot of times you end up making decisions based on what the library has available, as opposed to what might be the best like user flow. I personally prefer to engage in what I call user-driven development. So really thinking about like the usability, the accessibility, etc. of what I'm building, as opposed to like what meets the requirements. Like I want the person who's interacting with these things to enjoy it, get what they need, and be able to walk away or whatnot. I always like to add a little whimsy where I can. And then the last big one is that you'll probably end up loading too many components you'll never use. You'll end up loading a lot more styling that you'll never use. Like I said, when they're bloated or heavy, it's going to slow down your whole load, which people start getting grumpy about. It's the 3 seconds to load, or they'll bounce for most users. If you have a big application, especially for mobile, that's just killing their data, etc. So, what will I be assessing this evening? I'm going to basically talk about my experience with the documentation of this of each library. I'll talk about like how many bloat, which basically for me is going to be how many components does it have, and also how are they brought into the project, like how you import them into your JS or JSX files. General ease of use. So I'm in there, I'm working with it. Can I just like plop it in, or does it have like a ton of required props that I have to put in, or else it'll just error out on me, that kind of thing. So I did time box myself for each UI kit. I gave myself an hour to basically start it up and get it rolling. And then I'll talk about some issues I identified while I was working with it, and or that I read about while I was picking it up. And then lastly, how will I be doing this? I'll be doing a create React app, with the exception of the Ant demo, because it has its own CLI. Then just doing the yarn eject for those of you who haven't used create React app yet for just personal fun projects or whatnot. What that does is it essentially, when you do a create React app, it installs itself with like 3 dependencies, and it'll hide away your Webpack config and a handful of the other things that you usually end up touching when you're actually building something. So what it does is it just like spits out all of that stuff, so it's actually accessible within your project. I'll install the library, and then basically I'm just going to be following the instructions of the documentation. And how many people have like given talks and grumbled and whatnot about like bad documentation and etc. So it's kind of a, you know, see what happens when you just kind of take it as Amelia Bedelia style, if you will. If you haven't noticed, there's a lightsaber theme. Yeah, this morning on Denver Devs in the GIF channel, they were just posting tons and tons of GIFs of animals using lightsabers, and I was like, done. So, I'll start with Material UI. Obviously, Material is so hot right now. I have mixed feelings on it, but in general, like, it is pretty user-friendly, very clean looking, etc. It's going to be a very popular choice. In fact, it was #1 on the Hacker Noon list that I pulled these 4 off of. It's about 3 years old. They're moving from their V0 into V1 very soon. There is a beta available. And they're also looking forward and going to be moving to support pre-React. I always want to say pre-React whenever I see that. Like my brain tries to autocorrect it and it's not a thing. So, and then React Native. So my general feelings out of the box for the documentation was a B+. The getting started guide really does like outline everything that you need to know to like just stand up the simplest thing. They have really robust code examples in their documentation, which is definitely a good deal. But and I have this little star next to the npm installed because if you should have ever happen to go to the Material UI documentation, it says npm install Material UI. What is it missing? Save. I'm like, that is a low-hanging fruit situation, friends. And as a past educator, I was just like, are you joking me? So, yeah, that's really like, and I know that seems like a really harsh or silly, trivial thing to like dock their grade on, if you will, but it's like, that's seriously that's the start of your users like interaction with this library, and you don't even have the install correct. So that's that. It also, which is awesome, has an entire section about the explanation for server-side rendering, which we all know that doing server-side React apps is like painful enough sometimes. The fact that it has like a whole part that tells you like things that you'll need to configure and whatnot is really pretty excellent. In terms of bloat, there are 30 components, and a lot of them have different versions. So like your buttons and like different versions, and then obviously like the different states of those things. So deactivated inputs and etc. So it's really, it seems like it's a pretty well balanced, especially after interacting with a few different kits or libraries. It's a pretty decent balance of having things that you'll actually use without like going overboard. And then also the way that it is brought into a JS or JSX file is pretty nice in that it targets exactly what you need from the library. So you're not bringing in the whole Material and UI library, you can actually just bring in the component that you need. Ease of use. It was amazing. Honestly, I was so pleased because I was like, you know, when you're sitting down to start a project like this, you're just like, here we go. And like the first one was out of the box, really, actually very pleasant to interact with. I was able to import only the components that I needed, and they functioned correctly basically right off the bat, especially once I added in my, you know, on click, on change, on submit, etc. Time box, it was awesome. I was able to get this done in less than 45 minutes with an interruption, which is pretty exciting. So basically what I built with each kit was a very simple to-do app. So this is just a, you know, HTML template. I meant to do this earlier, obviously. And so my Material one, I'm sure anyone who has done the Create React app recognizes this strong black bar across the top, and we can do the things. I didn't build in like deleting things off of the list, so this might be the to-do list from hell for some of you. But yeah, this is, and I didn't really do much additional styling, obviously, because it's just like, I want to see what it can do when I just throw it on the page. So, you know, it has a little bit of personality. Like, it obviously has the material inputs, and I'll zoom a bit, there you go. And it just, like I said, it just works, which is really surprising and pleasant, and, you know, a nice thing to start off with. So, that said, some of the issues that I did identify. Within the library, the styles are actually inline on the components, which, who feels great about inline styling in general? So many hands raised. Okay, which basically means that if you want to override something specific about it, like you're not adding padding or margins and whatever, so it sits right on the page, but if you want to override something outside of the theming and whatnot, you have to use the important flag, which makes your CSS look really ugly. It makes you feel like, you know, nobody wants to have to go there, obviously. There are some obvious implications for using this on a server-side rendered app, but they documented it really well. So that is awesome to know. They're working on releasing a beta, so the thing that's stable and that you get when you do an npm install at this point is only receiving bug fixes. It's no longer getting any new features. And this is kind of a documentation issue or whatnot, but at one point I somehow ended up in the beta's documentation, and it wasn't like yelling at me like, this is the new, it wasn't like explicit that this is not the stable or what you're actually using. Like you just suddenly, it's like, oh, okay. I was like, I'm not seeing any of these things like in the library, what is happening? And also, so it comes with a light theme and a dark theme. What you saw here is hopefully, obviously, the light theme, but the dark theme, just out of the box, does not seem to actually be color accessible, so it doesn't have a strong enough ratio for people who are colorblind and whatnot. All right, so with that said, overall, I'd give it basically an A-. And after experiencing some of the other things that I've experienced, I'd probably like bump it up to an A. All right, so next I'm going to talk about semantic UI React. Who has ever used the semantic UI library just on its own? A couple people, that's awesome. The really nice thing about it is that it obviously produces semantic HTML, which is pretty exciting. This library is also 2 to 3 years old, and it is entirely jQuery free, which is for anyone who has brought in UI libraries. A lot of time they do bring in the jQuery, I'm guessing for ease of development, but you're just like, why did we bring in this entire library for it to do like 5 things? Overall, I'd give the documentation a B. The introduction, like you go to the introduction, which you expect to be like the getting started and whatnot page, it doesn't dive in. It just talks about like, we're great because of this, this, and this. And you're just like, okay, take your word for it for now, I guess. It is brought in through npm install, but you have to bring in the styles through CDN. I actually got over halfway through building out my little to-do app, and before I was just like, this is all really boring looking. Like, why is there no personality really to this? And then I realized, oh, you have to bring in your styling through a CDN, which was like, why wasn't that super explicit? It seemed like it was an optional thing through the documentation. And then it also had, one thing that is really great though, is that it has pretty specific explanations of like the versions of Webpack that it works best with. The documentation page, it has a little search, so you can type in checkbox, which is great. Obviously, then it'll take you directly to checkbox. However, there is a checkbox component, and then there's actually a checkbox component within the form component, and it doesn't pull up that one. So now suddenly you're using something that might not be as immediately connected up to your form. And then the code examples are really good, really clean. And the other thing that was kind of strange to me, I guess, and this kind of relates back up to what I just said about the searchable piece, is that they group components together in a strange way of like, there was a thing called tags, but then like tags wasn't only like what you would think of like the little pills or whatnot. Like there are also some like display ribbons and stuff like that. It was just like, why would this be considered that? I guess. So, you know.
Maybe from the semantic CSS.
Oh, probably. Great. Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think about it in that direction, but I was just like, I wouldn't think to look here if I was wanting to bring this kind of component in. And perhaps that's just, you know, a different, different approach or whatnot. So there are a lot of components. It's a very robust, big library. There's a lot of options. It's very themable, customizable. That's what I'm looking for. It does bring in your components though through it's not destruction, but it's brought in like an object, like you're pulling in the pieces, and you have to import the whole library. And importing the whole library on every page and on every single component that you're making and whatnot, obviously is not great. Ease of use. I didn't need to do anything with Webpack again, which was very nice. Again, like I said earlier, it wasn't immediately apparent that I needed to bring in the styling separately. Like I said, again, the documentation presented some challenges, and I guess ultimately, once I had the styling brought in, I just felt like it was still kind of bland. So, this one, since they're all done with Create React App, I have to run them separately. I didn't get into change the port. And I have all of my code available to you if anyone's that interested, but I don't foresee it. So, again, here's my working to-do app. And as I was saying, it was just like, it just seems kind of bland. You know, definitely you have opportunity for growth, but you're not fighting against it like you would be with, say, Material UI. But it's just, fine, in my opinion. Again, for the time box, it was actually really pretty slick to use, even though I realized that I didn't have my stylings until halfway through. And I was able to bring in some of the functioning code, like, the on change, on submit, etc. Since that was already done with my first one. So my identified issues here were that, why is it so bland? I guess, if it's this large deal. Another big benefit, I guess, of the semantic UI library is that you can basically use this as prop and say you're using the list. Piece. I actually have an example of it here. So, right there. I'm using the list component, but I can tell it how to render. Tell it to render it as a list, which is awesome. Until I wanted to do an as on this list item. And I'll actually just do it live. Why not? Here we go. So then when I switched it to be actually rendering as a list item, I could not get it to drop the dot, the list style decoration, if you will, to save my life. I spent more time than I could have. And obviously, like, if it was something that I was being paid to do, yeah, I'd probably give it a lot more focus and effort. But it was just like, really? Now you want to, now you want to behave like an ally? Because most UI kits, if you haven't worked with them yourself, a lot of times in React, everything is rendered as a div. And then it's just styled to be something else. So it's really awesome with semantic UI. And that I would say is like the best part about it, is that it'll render things semantically. It'll be best for like screen readers and whatnot for accessibility. But when you're fighting against like stupid little stuff like this, you're just like, really? So that was my one like pain point, frustration, whatnot with it. I didn't scour the entire thing, but there were no mentions in the documentation on if you need to do anything different for server-side rendering with it. And then overall, I would give semantic UI a B. It is pretty easy to like drop in and use, but again, it doesn't have a whole lot of personality, and sometimes when you use the main reason to use this library, it fights with you. So, just my general feeling about it. All right, so now we're going to talk about Ant. I'd never even heard of Ant, and they talk about themselves like everybody knows who they are. So if you are familiar with the Ant UI experience, then you know more than me. But basically, they call themselves enterprise class, and people go back and forth about whether enterprise is a real thing or not. But basically, I think what they're trying to say is that we're the real deal. We do everything very professionally. And I guess I would tend to agree. It is just over 2 years old, and then also on its back end or whatnot, it is written in TypeScript instead of JS, which I thought was just kind of an interesting little piece. For the documentation, I give it an A-. Definitely has like a decent getting started guide that gets you actually started. However, it has its own CLI, and they also have 2 different versions of said CLI. One is the demo version, that's the one that I used for tonight's presentation, but there's also a professional version. I didn't really understand why. It seems like, why double your work kind of concept. And then after I had taken the time to download said CLI, it basically, I found in the documentation, like, oh, here's the instructions for incorporating it into a Create React app. Wish I had looked it over. Okay. In terms of like bloat, if you will, there's 30 components, which seems to be about the average. And the way that they're brought into the project is the slow way, if you will. For ease of use, because I didn't use Create React App, obviously I had to like take a moment to kind of orient myself within the project. And with the demo CLI, it definitely does not give you as robust of a application, starting place or starting application as Create React App does. This is just like a small thing, but up until this point, the other 2 libraries that I had used both had list and list item components. This one didn't. Not a big deal, obviously. We can all write an LI. And I guess I was just ahead of myself a little bit. It was simple. It was easy to use in terms of getting it done in my time box, which is awesome. Then basically what I identified as issues is, while it's advertised as enterprise UI level, whatnot, I don't know, it just kind of seemed to, has anybody ever heard the, like, if you do Rails, you have to do things the Rails way? It kind of felt similar, of like, if you want to use Ant, you need to use Ant the Ant way. It was just perhaps in like how they wrote their documentation and whatnot, but it was just kind of the impression that I got, even in the limited time that I used it. It didn't have some of the elements that I had seen up until that point. I thought that it was weird to have a demo in like a professional version, and so the overall grade that I give it is a B. kill it and start this one. So we can just kind of see what I ended up with. So again, you just saw what the semantic what the create React app spun up for me. It has all these additional wonderful things out of the box. When I used the AMP CLI, this is all it gave me. Which, if you're wanting to just start something really small and like you're working on a silly little project, you're trying to proof of concept something on a weekend for yourself, maybe it's fine. But I was just like, where's the stuff? Is generally how I felt about it. This one is on its own porch since it was set up differently. So, and we did a thing. Again, it's like it has at least some color, which is more than I can say for some of them. Has a lovely little ripple situation as well. So it's usable, but again, like you kind of have to like work on their terms, which if you're cool with that, then I'm cool with that. And lastly, the dreaded React Toolbox. Who has tried using React Toolbox? Wow. All right. So Will is laughing, but that's about all I got. Basically, earlier this year, I was tasked with incorporating React Toolbox into the main website project that I was working on. And myself and the senior on my team, we fiddled with it, obviously not completely dedicated, but we fiddled with it for over a month, which is really frustrating. Because if you bring in the beta, it's done with regular CSS. If you bring in the older stable version, it's done with Sass. So if you bring in the older version with Sass, then obviously you have to bring in like Sass loader and whatnot into your Webpack. It's just kind of a heavier process. We ended up actually having to rip out specifically the exact components that we wanted because we were using Stylus as our pre-compiler for styling. And we had to rip it out, and I had to actually translate the entire thing into Stylus because we were just fighting. We fought with the new one, we fought with the old one. We were running into server-side rendering issues and whatnot. So anyway, overall for documentation, I'd give it a C. There is a getting started guide. There's a very cool playground if you go to reacttoolbox.com. So when you are looking at the components, it'll basically there's a button that says like load into the playground, and you can interact with it, and it's very neat until you're trying to actually get it to freaking work on your own page. And the other thing that's really frustrating is that the documentation is spread out all over the place. So there's the documentation on the website, then there's the documentation in the repo. Like to get it incorporated into your project, like you need to be looking in like 3 different places, which is a little frustrating. And then there's also this themer aspect of it that even after looking at it for a month, I never got a handle on. It was just like, when do I need to be using this? When can I actually be setting these variables, etc. Vaguely frustrating. There are about 28 components, almost 30. Like I said, we've kind of found apparently the sweet spot of components. And the way that they're brought in is very specific. Obviously, if we're going like into the module, into the library, and then to the component. And then there's also different implications on whether you bring it in an object or as itself. So if you bring it in just by itself, it'll bring it styling. If you bring it inside of the object, you have to do some additional work within your component to get it to actually show up the way you expect it to. So it's just kind of and there's also rules around like, for doing it with a Create React app, you don't use the object, but if you're just doing it in some other setup, you might need to. And there's no like obvious delineation of like which one you need to do. Ease of use. Obviously, it went super well. It needed additional Webpack stuff. And then once you got done adding the additional Webpack stuff, you had to do post CSS configuration stuff. It was just kind of like, let's keep going down the rabbit hole. Then the other issue, obviously, being the documentation is just like spread to the wind. For the time box, I give it an F because I tried like looking at create React app specific documentation. I tried looking at just the general documentation, and I never got it to actually compile, which is defeating, obviously, especially since all the other ones have gone really well. When we were trying to incorporate it at work, we did run into server-side rendering issues with the beta, at least. And when we brought in the components that we actually needed, we ended up having to rewrite parts of them because they were trying to access window before window was really accessible. And those kinds of things is pretty frustrating. Then obviously, like I said before, just the themer madness. It's like, you should know when to use it. It's like, but you basically told me like 5 different ways to import components at this point. Like, who do I trust? Then there's the fight, if you will, of beta versus stable. I didn't get any clear direction on whether they're still working on the stable version or if they're just focusing specifically on the beta. But when we were trying to incorporate the beta, there were definitely some issues. Like I was saying with the server-side rendering. And yes, I did end up giving the actual box an F because I just couldn't get it up and going. And especially compared to my experiences with the other 3, it was like glaring of like, this isn't simple. This isn't out of the box functionality. So a quick little review. We ended up with A- from Material UI, Semantic got a B, Ant got a B, and React Toolbox got kicked around a little. So I will open it up for questions, but otherwise, thank you.
Not a question, but I did a similar evaluation some months ago, and I didn't look at Ant, but I had roughly the same 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And I went with Material UI for some things.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously very current. It looks slick. People who aren't in the software world will be like, this looks awesome. Like, this looks exactly like all those other apps that are like on my phone and whatnot. Or this, I can interact with this in the exact same way that I interact with my Gmail. This makes sense to me, which is awesome. But like I said, I generally feel like Material lacks a little bit of personality, personally. All right. So yeah, I am, as it's mentioned on here, I am looking for work. I got laid off from my job 2 weeks before my wedding. So, yeah. If you have any ideas, please reach out. And on Denver Dev Slack, I will be pursuing this. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up the evening. So thank you everybody for coming out. I did just want to say another quick thanks to our sponsors. And if you have any feedback for this meetup, as far as things you'd like to see, if you want us to change up the food, you want different topics that you'd like to see presented upon, please come and talk to myself or Will Beard. Will, raise your hand over here. We are certainly interested in that feedback and would love to hear your thoughts on making it better. So with that, thanks again for coming and have a good night. It's been great. And I just showed up. I was just thinking actually that
Thank you.
oh,
Yeah. Did you guys like to talk to them?
I got to do this. It's coming out. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I want to say it was the second.
Heard really good things about this.
Also,